The room was full of laughter. Not joy, mockery. A small boy stood frozen, holding broken wrapping paper, while shattered toys lay at his feet. His mother didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at her father, the man who had been silent for years, and whispered one sentence that would change everything. Nyasha Mbeki had spent the whole morning cleaning the small living room, even though it was already spotless. She wanted everything to look right for her son, Tino. The decorations were simple: 2 blue balloons, a small banner she made by hand, and a round chocolate cake she bought after saving for weeks. It wasn't much, but it was filled with love. Tino kept running around in excitement, asking when everyone would arrive, his eyes bright with hope. Nyasha smiled and told him today was special, because he was special. Guests slowly began to arrive. A few relatives, some neighbors, and 2 of Tino's school friends. They brought small gifts wrapped in colorful paper, and Tino thanked each one politely. Nyasha watched him with pride. She had taught him kindness even when life was not kind to her. Soft music played in the background, and for a brief moment, the room felt warm and peaceful. Nyasha allowed herself to believe the day might go well. Then the door opened again, much louder this time. Zanele Mbeki walked in late, wearing an expensive dress, high heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her laugh filled the room before anyone could greet her. She looked around slowly, her eyes scanning the decorations, the cake, the furniture. Her smile was wide, but it didn't reach her eyes. The room fell quiet in a strange way, like everyone suddenly became careful with their breathing. Zanele kissed the air near Nyasha's cheek and spoke loudly about traffic, about meetings, about how busy her life was. She barely looked at Tino at first. When she finally did, she smiled and said how big he had grown, her tone playful but cold. Nyasha thanked her for coming, her voice calm, her hands slightly shaking as she adjusted the tablecloth. People began to sit differently. Conversations slowed. Some relatives forced smiles, others avoided eye contact. The joy that had filled the room minutes earlier felt thinner now, like glass that could crack at any moment. Tino noticed it too. He stood closer to his mother, holding her hand without saying a word. Zanele took a seat like she owned the place, crossing her legs and laughing at her own jokes. She commented on the cake, the decorations, the size of the room, all with a sharp sweetness that made Nyasha's chest feel tight. This was supposed to be a celebration, but it already felt like a test. A punishment disguised as a party. And deep down, Nyasha sensed that the hardest moments had not even arrived yet. Zanele's eyes moved slowly around the room again, this time with a small laugh that sounded sharp. She pointed at the balloons and said they looked creative, stretching the word in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. Then she touched the banner on the wall and joked that it must have taken so much effort. A few relatives chuckled softly, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Nyasha stood still, forcing a polite smile, telling herself not to react. It was her son's day. Zanele then noticed the pile of wrapped gifts on the table. Her eyes lit up with a strange excitement. "Let me see what the birthday boy got," she said loudly, already reaching for them. Before Nyasha could respond, Zanele picked up the first box and shook it near her ear. "Let's inspect these," she laughed. "You know children deserve quality." Her voice was playful, but her eyes were cruel. She tore the wrapping paper open too fast, snapping a cheap plastic toy inside. "Oops," she said, laughing even louder. "Guess it wasn't strong." Someone in the room let out an awkward laugh. Zanele moved to the next gift, ripping it open and bending it until it cracked. "These things don't last anyway," she joked. The laughter around her grew nervous, uneven, like people laughing out of fear rather than humor. Tino stood frozen. At first, he smiled, thinking it was part of the game. But as each gift broke, his smile faded. His eyes followed every movement of his aunt's hands. When she crushed the small toy car he had been excited about, his mouth slowly opened, but no sound came out. He looked at his mother, confused, searching her face for an explanation. Nyasha stepped forward softly and said, "That's enough, Zanele." Her voice was calm but tight. Zanele waved her off. "Relax," she said. "I'm just joking. Children should learn early not to get attached to cheap things." A few relatives nodded, others stared at the floor. No one truly defended the child. The last gift fell from Zanele's hands, broken in two. She clapped once and smiled proudly, as if she had performed something impressive. The room was quiet now. No laughter. No music. Just the sound of wrapping paper on the floor. Tino slowly lowered his head. His hands clenched into small fists, then loosened. He didn't cry. That was the part that hurt the most. The joy that filled his eyes earlier was gone, replaced by something heavy and unfamiliar. In that moment, a child learned that laughter can sometimes mean cruelty, and that silence can be louder than shouting. Tino stood very still, like his body had forgotten how to move. The room felt bigger now, louder, even though no one was speaking. His eyes were fixed on the broken toys at his feet, pieces of what had been excitement only minutes before. He didn't cry. There were no tears, no shaking lips, no loud questions. Instead, there was silence, the kind that sits heavy inside a child who doesn't yet have words for pain. He slowly bent down and picked up one of the broken toys, turning it in his small hands as if trying to understand what went wrong. His face showed confusion more than sadness. He kept looking from the toy to the adults around him, waiting for someone to explain, to laugh and say it was all a game, to make it right again. But no one did. The adults avoided his eyes. Some pretended to check their phones. Others whispered to each other. The silence taught him something new and painful, that sometimes people laugh while you hurt. Nyasha felt her chest tighten. She had seen her son fall before, scrape his knee, cry, and get back up. This was different. This was not a wound she could clean or kiss away. She walked toward him slowly and knelt down so their eyes were level. Her hands trembled as she gently touched his shoulders. Tino finally looked at her, his eyes wide, not angry, not accusing, just lost. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." She didn't apologize for the small gifts or the simple decorations. She didn't apologize for not having more money. She apologized for bringing him into a room where kindness was missing. For bringing him close to people who forgot how to protect a child's heart. Tino frowned slightly. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly. That question cut deeper than any insult. Nyasha shook her head quickly and pulled him into her arms. "No," she said softly. "Never. You did nothing wrong." She held him tightly, wishing she could shield him from the eyes watching, from the quiet judgment, from the lesson he never should have learned so early. Around them, the room felt frozen. Everyone could see the moment happening, but no one stepped forward. This was the moment Tino learned what humiliation feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and confusing. And as Nyasha held her son, she realized something painful and powerful at the same time. Protecting his dignity would always matter more than pleasing family who forgot what love looks like. Nyasha had always known her place in the family, even as a child. She was never openly rejected, but she was never chosen either. At family gatherings, she was the one asked to help in the kitchen while others sat and laughed. When decisions were made, her opinion was never requested. If she spoke, people listened politely, then moved on as if nothing had been said. Over time, she learned that being quiet made things easier. Zanele, on the other hand, filled every room she entered. She spoke loudly, laughed boldly, and demanded attention without shame. When she succeeded, the family celebrated her like a trophy. When she failed, excuses were made for her. She was defended even when she was wrong. Everyone said she was strong and special. Nyasha was called understanding, a word often used when people expect you to accept less. When it came to support, the difference was clear. Zanele's education was paid for without question. Her business ideas were funded. Her mistakes were cleaned up quietly. Nyasha was told to be patient, to manage on her own, to not ask for too much. When inheritance was discussed jokingly at family events, someone would laugh and say, "Zanele will handle everything." Nyasha's name was never mentioned, as if it didn't belong in that future. Even their father rarely spoke up for her. He wasn't cruel, but his silence hurt just as much. He watched, listened, and said nothing. Relatives followed his lead. If the head of the family did not defend Nyasha, why should anyone else? Slowly, people learned it was safe to ignore her, to speak over her, to treat her struggles as normal and unimportant. Nyasha didn't fight this image. She didn't protest or demand fairness. She worked, raised her son, and carried her burdens quietly. She smiled when expected, thanked people for small favors, and never reminded anyone of what she lacked. Survival became her strength. Silence became her shield. So when no one defended her that day, it wasn't sudden. It was the result of years of quiet neglect. People had grown used to Nyasha enduring things without complaint. They assumed she always would. What they didn't realize was that silence does not mean weakness. It often means someone has learned to stand alone, and is waiting for the moment when truth no longer needs permission to speak. Nyasha Mbeki sat quietly at the edge of the room, his hands resting on his walking stick, his eyes moving slowly from face to face. Age had bent his back and softened his voice, but it had not taken away his memory. Once he had been the center of this family. His word was final. His decisions shaped lives. People used to stand when he entered a room. Now, conversations continued even when he was present, as if he were part of the furniture. To most people, Ezekiel looked tired and irrelevant. They whispered that old age had made him weak. Some believed he no longer understood what was happening around him. Others assumed he simply didn't care anymore. When Zanele spoke loudly or acted without respect, they watched Ezekiel closely. When he didn't react, they took it as permission. His silence became approval in their minds. But Ezekiel was watching everything. He noticed how Nyasha stood slightly apart from the group, how she smiled even when she was uncomfortable. He saw the way Zanele dominated every conversation, how she enjoyed being admired. He heard the laughter that was a little too sharp, the jokes that carried hidden cruelty. He saw Tino's small hands clutching his shirt, his eyes searching the room for safety. Ezekiel had never chosen sides, and that was his greatest mistake. When his children were young, he believed fairness meant staying neutral. He thought stepping in would create more problems. So he stayed quiet when Zanele was praised too much. He stayed quiet when Nyasha was overlooked. Years passed, and his silence grew heavy, turning into a habit he no longer knew how to break. Inside, Ezekiel carried regrets he never spoke aloud. He remembered moments he should have corrected, words he should have said, protection he should have given. But pride and age made him slow, and fear made him quiet. He told himself there would be another time, a better moment. That moment never seemed to come. Now, as he sat there watching the birthday unfold, Ezekiel felt something stir inside him. Not anger, but shame. Shame that his silence had taught others to be cruel. Shame that people believed weakness and quiet were the same thing. They had mistaken patience for blindness. Everyone in the room believed Ezekiel was finished. They thought his days of influence were over. They assumed his silence meant nothing was coming. What they did not understand was that silence can be a choice, not a failure. And sometimes, the longest silence hides the strongest words, waiting for the one moment when speaking will change everything. Tino's small hands trembled as he held the snapped toy, the plastic jagged where Zanele's fingers had crushed it. His eyes, wide and confused, searched the room for an answer, for some sign that this was all a joke. The laughter of the adults around him felt like knives, sharp and cold, cutting through the warmth of the party. Every giggle, every whispered, "Funny, isn't it?" echoed in the quiet corners of Ezekiel's mind, reminding him of every time he had stayed silent, every moment he had let cruelty slip by without challenge. He looked up at his grandfather, his innocent voice breaking the hush of the room. "Did I do something wrong?" The words were simple, small, almost too quiet to hear over the remaining chuckles and the clinking of glasses, but they hit Ezekiel like a thunderclap. It wasn't just about a toy or a birthday party, it was the weight of years, the accumulation of neglect and favoritism, all condensed into that single question. That tiny voice, so vulnerable, pierced the walls of indifference he had built around himself. Ezekiel's chest tightened. For the first time in years, the burden of his silence pressed on him in a way he could no longer ignore. He thought of Nyasha, who had endured quiet humiliation while he did nothing. He thought of Zanele, who had always taken the spotlight, mocking without consequence, confident in the assumption that he would stay passive. And now, here was Tino, pure and unguarded, holding a broken toy and asking for guidance from the one man everyone assumed powerless. The room seemed to stop. Even the whispers and nervous laughter dimmed as Ezekiel's gaze fell upon Tino, and then slowly, on Nyasha. He saw the courage it took for her to stay calm, the strength in her quiet composure. He realized the years he had spent observing cruelty without intervention had taught more lessons than he wanted to admit, lessons about injustice, about the cost of silence, and about the responsibility of power. In that moment, Ezekiel felt a surge of clarity. The question, "Did I do something wrong?" was no longer Tino's burden alone. It was a challenge to every adult in the room, a mirror held up to Ezekiel's conscience. It shattered the comfort of passivity. His heart raced, his hands shook, and for the first time, he understood that one act of courage, even a child's simple question, could awaken a man who had long thought his voice no longer mattered. That fragile, trembling question ignited something inside Ezekiel, a spark that could no longer be ignored. It was a quiet explosion, the kind that changes everything. Ezekiel's chair creaked as he slowly rose, each movement deliberate, as if the weight of years of silence pressed on his shoulders. The laughter around the room faltered, unsure, like it sensed a storm was coming but didn't yet know its shape. Everyone froze, the clinking of glasses and faint music fading into a tense hush. His eyes, usually calm and unreadable, were sharp now, scanning Zanele as if finally seeing through every layer of arrogance she had built around herself. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slowly. For a moment, his voice quivered, barely above a whisper, betraying the emotion he had buried for decades. Then, as if steadying against a tide, it strengthened, cutting through the room with clarity and power. Every ear turned toward him, every eye fixed on the man who had always been quiet, who had always allowed the world to run unchecked. And in that silence, Zanele felt it first, the weight of the room, the shift from mockery to fear. "Zanele." Ezekiel's voice was calm now, but each word carried the force of years of observation and restraint. He paused, letting the anticipation build, letting the laughter fade entirely. The guests, once chuckling at Tino's broken toys, now watched with bated breath. Even those who had laughed nervously felt their stomachs tighten, sensing that this was no longer entertainment, this was reckoning. Then he asked the question. Just one. Simple, measured, but it landed like a hammer on steel. "Do you even know what you've cost?" The room seemed to shrink. The color drained from Zanele's face, her wide smile faltering, her arrogance evaporating in an instant. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The laughter, once bright and careless, died in midair, leaving a heavy, suffocating quiet. Eyes darted between her and Ezekiel, sensing the invisible shift of power. The relatives who had snickered moments ago now realized they were witnesses to something far bigger. A silent authority finally spoken, a man who had watched, waited, and now demanded accountability. Zanele's fingers trembled slightly, her posture stiff. She understood immediately. She was no longer in control. The man she had assumed powerless, the father she had believed would do nothing, had finally risen. And in that charged silence, the room understood. Something had changed forever. The joke was over, and the consequences were just beginning. Ezekiel's eyes softened, but the weight in his voice made everyone lean in closer. For years, no one had noticed the quiet sacrifices, the invisible labor, the choices made in shadows while the world applauded someone else. He looked directly at Zanele, then swept his gaze over the relatives who had laughed so easily at Tino's pain. "Do you know what it took for this family to stay standing all these years?" he began, his tone steady, commanding attention. "Do you know who carried the burden while others lived in comfort?" A nervous murmur passed through the room. Zanele's confident posture faltered as the question hung in the air. Ezekiel paused, letting the silence press against every person's chest. Then, with deliberate calm, he spoke the truth no one had been ready to hear. "Nyasha," he said, his voice almost breaking with the years of restraint, "while you were living in luxury, she was the one who sacrificed everything. She gave up her education, her opportunities, her future, all so this family could thrive. She funded your schooling. She made decisions that kept this family's name and fortune intact. She paid the price so others could walk freely." Gasps filled the room. Faces turned pale. Zanele's jaw tightened. No one had suspected that the quiet, unassuming sister had been quietly holding the family together while appearing to do nothing. The laughter from before seemed ridiculous now, almost shameful. Ezekiel continued, his voice steady, echoing with authority and the weight of decades. "And what did she get in return? Silence. Ignorance. Mockery. Yet she endured. She sacrificed willingly, not for recognition, not for applause, but because she understood what responsibility really meant." The room was still, the air heavy with the revelation. Everyone shifted uncomfortably. They had laughed at a small boy, at a modest party, at a mother trying to shield her child, but the truth cut deeper than any insult could. Nyasha had been the invisible pillar, the unseen protector, the quiet force behind everything that kept the family alive. Zanele's face drained of color. She had never realized the cost of her comfort, the debts she unknowingly owed. And in that moment, Ezekiel made it clear, the laughter, the mockery, the privilege of comfort had been built on Nyasha's sacrifice, and only he had known until now. The truth, finally spoken, changed everything. Ezekiel reached into his briefcase with calm precision, the room still tense, hearts pounding. Everyone's eyes followed his every move, unsure what the aging patriarch would do next. Then, in a gesture both simple and devastating, he pulled out a thick envelope and held it steadily before him. "This," he said, his voice clear, commanding, "belongs to the one who carried the weight of this family when no one else did." He handed the envelope directly to Nyasha. The room seemed to shrink around her as she took it. Fingers trembling slightly, she opened it and slowly scanned the papers inside. Her eyes widened, but she remained composed, as if she had expected this moment all along. Every contract, every account, every deed confirming control and authority, all officially in her name now. A stunned silence fell over the guests. Zanele's lips parted, but no words came out. Her confidence, her arrogance, her carefully built image of superiority, all of it crumbled in an instant. She had laughed at a mother protecting her child, mocked a modest celebration, and humiliated a boy who hadn't asked for privilege. And now, she realized that the power she had taken for granted was gone. Not just the wealth she thought secure, but the respect and authority she had assumed were hers by birth. Relatives gasped. Some whispered, some stared in disbelief. The room that had echoed with laughter and mockery now felt heavy, suffocating. For the first time, Zanele felt the sting of consequence. She had been blind to the sacrifices Nyasha had made, to the quiet strength and resilience that had built the foundation for everything the family had ever relied on. Nyasha looked around the room calmly. No shouting, no gloating, no revenge. Her eyes met her sister's, steady and unflinching. The message was clear, she had not taken from Zanele. She had claimed what was rightfully hers, what had always been earned through perseverance, patience, and integrity. In that moment, the hierarchy of the family shifted forever. The room understood it immediately. Privilege without merit can be stripped away silently. Respect and power belong not to those who flaunt them, but to those who earn them, even in the shadows. Zanele's laughter had vanished, replaced by disbelief and shame. Nyasha's quiet triumph spoke louder than any words could, and the envelope in her hands became the symbol of justice long overdue, a public reversal that no one would ever forget. Nyasha stood for a moment, holding the envelope close, letting the weight of the moment settle around her. She didn't cheer. She didn't gloat. There was no dramatic announcement, no celebration. The laughter and whispers of the room faded behind her, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. Tino's small hand slipped into hers, and she looked down at him, smiling softly, a smile that said more than words ever could. They walked out of the hall together, leaving stunned relatives behind. The chaos, the embarrassment, the sudden reversal of fortune, it all stayed in that room. Nyasha knew that real victory didn't need to be loud. It didn't need applause. It was enough to reclaim her dignity, her future, and her son's happiness. Each step they took toward the door felt like shedding years of silent pain, judgment, and exclusion. Outside, the air felt fresher, lighter. Nyasha and Tino headed home, hand in hand, the city bustling around them, but they moved as if in a world of their own. Later, we see them in their modest home, sunlight streaming through the windows. Nyasha is no longer trapped by family expectations or cruel comparisons. She is rebuilding, slowly, purposefully, and peacefully. She organizes her life around what matters most: love, integrity, and freedom. Every decision she makes now is deliberate, rooted in respect for herself and for the life she wants to create for Tino. Meanwhile, Zanele faces isolation. The family that once mirrored her status and supported her shallow displays now keeps distance. Invitations stop coming. People who once sought favor now whisper behind closed doors. She realizes that power without character is empty, that humiliation comes not only in public but in the silent absence of trust and respect. The tables have turned, quietly, without spectacle, and she cannot undo it. The final scene lingers on Nyasha and Tino sharing a simple ice cream on a quiet street, smiling and laughing, no cameras, no audience. The message is clear: true strength is measured in dignity, not in vengeance. Quiet perseverance can outlast arrogance. Silence can carry power far greater than any outburst of anger or display of wealth. Nyasha's journey reminds the audience that life rewards those who endure, who act with integrity, and who let their actions, not their words, speak the loudest. In the end, the lesson resonates. Being underestimated is not weakness. Quiet resilience, patience, and love are the forces that truly move mountains, and they leave a mark no one can erase.